Thanks so much everyone for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that is being set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello and welcome to the 71st episode of the Functional Forum. This month we're going to be continuing our series on stress and the brain. We're going to look at the 4 key factors, the 4 key stresses that affect the health of your patients and their brains. It's going to be a great show. Enjoy. So back in June, we attended the Institute for Functional Medicine's annual international conference, and one of the key topics this year was stress. And at that conference, we caught up with Dr. David Rakel, and we talked about all things related to mental, emotional stress, which is probably the first thing you think about when you think about stress. It was a super interesting interview, and we've got the best bits of it for you right now. Right, we are here with Dr. David Rakel. He is a leader in the space of medicine focused on health and healing, and has just given a great talk here on perception in medicine. And you know, we have a range of practitioners who watch the show, but what is it about perception that's important to the art of health and healing?
Well, I think it all starts there, right? Right now you're perceiving me, I'm perceiving you. We go into judgment quite quickly. And then that perception, this non-physical perception, becomes physical as it goes through our brain and into our hormones, and then activates different responses within the body. So if we start to see life as beautiful versus angry or fearful, that can actually influence our biology, that might influence our risk of diseases as well as stress, and it's the first thing, how we perceive the world.
So this conference is focused on stress and pain and addiction. It seems like those 3 areas, this could be a pretty important topic.
Very much so. And you know, that influences pain, how you perceive it. You know, do I see my life as unfair and one of suffering, or do I see it as potentially there's a way beyond that? And I think one of our most important jobs as clinicians is to believe in people's ability to heal. And then they start to perceive themselves differently, and we start to give them confidence to get over some humps that may have been barriers in the past.
Yeah, my co-founder, before he passed, he used to talk about empathy as seeing other people, not just feeling other people's pain, but actually seeing each other as capable.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what you're talking about there.
I like that. We are seeing, there's actually 2 camps, it's a little silly, between empathy and compassion. I think it's important to realize that empathy is a building block towards compassion. Compassion, 2 people suffering together, that we're interconnected, whereas empathy is I feel your pain, and then I feel like I have to do something about it. And if I don't have enough energy, I might see you suffering and then, I just can't deal with James right now, I'm going to turn the other way. That's empathy distress or empathy fatigue. There's no such thing as compassion fatigue or compassion distress, because one way to define it, which I love, comes from some Buddhist scholars, is compassion is giving life to life. And if I see you suffering, I want to give you something I have. But if I'm depressed or burned out or haven't done my own work, I can't give you what I don't have. So that's why doing this for ourselves is the number one first goal, is how do we fill up our own life? How do we fill up our own cup? So I can go to you and realize that we're part of the same unit. And when I help you, I help myself, and my energy actually grows.
Amazing. What are some of the, when you train physicians, what are some of the things that you focus on to help them sort of facilitate either different perception in the way that they see the patients, or patients in how they perceive themselves?
Yeah. Well, the whole history of medicine is about pathogenesis. It's about waiting for the body to break and then try to fix it, which we've done a lot of great things with that, but right now it's gotten really expensive and potentially harmful. So now we're trying to shift the culture towards more salutogenesis, salute, health, the genesis or creation of health. And if we start to look upon our patients, our world, our communities as potentially healthy, we do things differently rather than just do a bunch of tests to diagnose the disease. They're both really important, but this pathogenic model gets about 90% of our energy, and the prevention or salutogenic model gets about 10%. So this cultural shift is teaching people to see the health within each human being instead of just looking for the disease.
And what can practitioners do to sort of maximize those effects in generally private practice in a little town somewhere in America or around the world?
Yeah, very pragmatically ask a different question. So a lot of times we'll see people for an annual physical. So instead of just marking off whether you got your immunizations and going through a bunch of check marks, try asking that person, what do you want your health for? Or what are your health goals? Since starting to do that, I've had more meaningful conversations with my patients than I have in the past 23 years of doing this work. And then we start to see our expertise in service of their health goals. And then we create the team around them, but it's based on their goals, so their energy and their meaning in their life is what drives the process. Otherwise, you just come in with epigastric pain, and I just shut off your acid pump, and I move on to the next patient. Yeah. And now we're learning that that causes a lot of harm. Yeah. But it's evidence-based medicine that's accepted within the culture of our current healthcare system. But it's not health and healing, it's just suppressing a symptom.
There's been a lot of people over time, doctors who have realized this, right? Over the last few years, it hasn't been cool or trendy, but it's kind of going in that direction. One of the problems with it has been it's kind of an inefficient use of time. Yeah. What are some of the ways that you see that efficiency is coming into the system where this could actually be done at scale in systems to create transformation in healthcare?
Yeah. Well, I'm a primary care physician, so I'm a little biased towards seeing people over time. So if I get to know you over time, I don't have to spend that long of a time with you at one time because I know your history over time. Yeah. And if you look at why most countries with a strong primary care infrastructure have much better health outcomes at a much lower price. And there's about a 13-fold return on investment. Every dollar invested in primary care saves about 13. Yeah. And that relationship with human beings over time is very valuable because it reduces fear. If I don't know you and you come in with some scary symptom, I'm going to order a lot of tests. I'm going to send you for an epidural steroid injection. But if I know you and know that you've just gone through a very stressful time in your life, maybe we should focus on that first. And then if it doesn't get better, then we go to the rescue therapy.
Interesting. What do you think? I know we're going to go a little bit deeper into to that, but I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of a few things. So one is the group visit model and facilitating people in a group together, maybe even using other practitioners and providers to support that, so that there's, it's amazing to be listened to by a doctor, but being listened to by 16 peers can be pretty powerful too.
Exactly, and that's the power, is number one, I'm not alone. These other people who are my peers have similar challenges. And the guide or the clinician whoever that might be, who's leading the group, their main goal is to focus on getting them over their symptoms. The challenge in this, we see this with fibromyalgia support groups. If people just focus on their symptoms, it almost becomes a competition of who has more severe symptoms. Yeah. But if they go beyond their symptom into what gives their life meaning and purpose, then they start to talk about more meaningful aspects of their lives. And then they have the group support to say, hey, how's that going for you? Yeah. And boy, that's magical when that happens.
So it's a group visit built on salutogenesis.
Yes.
Amazing. So I know you've written and talked a lot about the placebo effect, and we've argued for placebo maximized medicine for a number of years, and maybe I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that idea, and also how every practitioner out there, whether they be doing drugs or integrative therapies or combinations of standard of care, non-standard of care, can maximize the self-healing capacity of the body and maximize that effect.
Yeah. Sir William Osler said this is an art based in science. And the art is how do we activate those self-healing mechanisms. So I don't like the word placebo just because it kind of limits it to trickery. What we're really talking about is an effect that goes anywhere from 0% to 100%. And that's how do we create this ceremony and match, there's another saying that, what kind of doctor do I need to be for this person today? So I need to go into the context of their life to understand what style I need to take to maximize their healing effects. Because everybody's different. And it's my job to go into their life, go into their belief system, go into their perception. A lot of what we teach is, first of all, as a clinician, you got to look at your own perception to see how you see the world, so you're not too quick to just project what you believe onto the patient. So we have to do our own implicit unconscious bias training to understand how we've been conditioned, so then I can take off these lenses and put yours on.
What are some conditionings that practitioners get in integrative and functional medicine that may not be true, and that sometimes people have to get beyond in order to practice effectively?
That may not be true.
That may not be helping them practice patient-centered care.
Yeah. This may not be a popular statement, but I think it's true. At the beginning of functional medicine, we just replaced pills with supplements. And we did a lot of testing, even though the testing may not be helpful. Now functional medicine is evolving to look at more the matrix in the context of human beings, which really has garnered my respect to look at the whole person. But whether we're talking about functional medicine or conventional medicine, we have to look at the market, what makes money. And we have to be aware of that, because what makes money usually gets the loudest voice. And if we look at our research, the best research is from people who can afford it, pharmaceutical companies. Yeah. We don't have a lot of research on forgiveness, right? There's not a big profit margin. So I think it's really important, as part of my job, looking at science to digest it and translate it to the clinician, my partner. It's really important for me to look where the funding comes and look for other sources of bias.
Is there a case that you can remember that affected the way that you think of your own perception, even maybe when you thought you had pretty objective perception?
Oh yeah. Boy, when I came out of residency, I thought I knew everything. I thought, you do as I say, you'll be fine. And then you start to listen to your patients, and they teach you that's not the case. Yeah. And they teach you that this complexity requires a new, fresh approach every time you sit down with a new human being or someone you even know already.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I know your talk was on perception. You also had another talk that was on systemic transformation. I mean, is it the one in the micro leading to the other in the macro when scaled up?
Yeah, I think the scale's growing, but as you know, culture is slow to change. But now with our 3.6 trillion, now 20% of our GDP in America, that's like 20% of your paycheck. Yeah. Are we giving our country 20% of everybody's paycheck in value? So people are realizing that, the payers are realizing that we need more value. We need to improve outcomes. We can't just do the find it, fix it approach. We need to go a little bit deeper and address people's risks and empowerment towards health way before the disease occurs.
One of the things that it can be tricky in that model is to create enough urgency in patients to activate. And Jeff Bland was saying the other day, like you don't know what you prevent, right? And it's hard to get people fired up about that. And you've seen expensive examples of people trying to facilitate people to want prevention, and really there's this sort of moment that happens when people get sick, when there's an opportunity to take action from a new story about themselves that they weren't ready for before. Have you found ways to sort of create an urgency before symptoms in the normal population? Because otherwise we're just sort of waiting for it all to go wrong, right?
Exactly right. You hit a really good point. We found this out in working with the VA. So we had Tracy Gaudet heads up the Office of Patient-Centered Care and Cultural Transformation. And our team went in to educate people, clinicians, interprofessional teams within the VA system to do this new approach. But one of the things we didn't predict was that we were able to train the clinicians, but not the vets. The vets were still in the, you give me the pill, doc. Yeah. that's what you're for. So we had to not only train the clinicians, we had to treat those we serve, our patients, our veterans. And when you get cancer, that's like a hammer on the head that says, James, look at what's important in your life. Yeah. There's motivation. How do we facilitate that motivation before the cancer is the main question. And that's why I think we need to change the conversation to some of these deeper questions. What's meaningful to you? What do you want your health for? That's a question you can ask yourself now. If you have people who you love, often that influences behavior. So hopefully we can use that meaning and purpose that drives everybody's behavior at an earlier stage before the disease occurs.
Doc, thank you so much for your work on the cutting edge. Look forward to sharing this interview with our community. If you want to find out more about Dr. David Rakel and his work, where's the best place to find out?
Let's see, I have a website, davidrakel.com.
All right, so in this episode, we're talking about the 4 key stressors and how it affects the brain and just the health of your patients. Now, one of the things we have to do is to educate patients on these stressors. And ultimately, one of the reasons why we ended up partnering with the Lifestyle Matrix Resource Center as our major sponsor on the forum is because they have so many tools and resources to help educate your patients, whether it's in-practice tools, educational materials, or even some of the tools that are available online for you to be able to add to your email autoresponders, your social media, or your website. There are so many tools there to be able to educate not just your patients, but people who might be prospective patients, people that you're meeting out in the community. So check out goevomed.com/LMRC. You can find out more about the 4 stressor program and how it can work in your practice. Check it out.
Hi, my name is Nelson Valina. I'm a physiatrist working in brain injury medicine, and I am using alternative and holistic therapies to help with brain recovery after stroke and brain injury. We are using therapies such as nutritional therapy and supplementation and use of essential oils and aromatherapy and any therapies that will help decrease the sympathetic response, such as the physical therapies, including yoga and meditation and breath work.
So one of my favorite things is when I find a doctor who not only is incredible at communicating the principles of functional medicine, but also has not only the practice, but the practice model to back it up. Dr. Christopher Mote practices in Colorado. I had the opportunity to meet him earlier this year, and we put him on our podcast series on group visits, where he's doing some really innovative stuff in bringing group visits to lab review, which can be one of the most time-consuming parts of doing functional medicine. So he has been operating with this 4-pillar model and the 4 key stressors for years, and so we dived in with him to look at inflammation and infection as one of the core stressors. Super interesting interview. Enjoy. All right, so we are talking about the 4 key stressors today. And if you think about stress and particularly how it affects the brain, you probably think mental emotional stress, but there are other stressors that play a big impact in our understanding of health and how we can get people back to homeostasis. So I'm super excited to be here with Dr. Christopher Mote. He is a physician in Colorado. We've had him on the podcast. It's his debut on the Functional Forum. So Doc, welcome. Thanks for being on the forum.
Thank you. It's a genuine pleasure.
So I know that you're pretty passionate about these 4 stressors and that, you know, you take this pretty seriously. How seriously do you take this?
So I started my practice as a chiropractor almost 20 years ago. And when I learned the power of these 4 key stresses to stimulate the stress response, my clinical effectiveness was never greater. But one of them tripped me up a bit. It was inflammation. It ultimately forced me to go back to medical school in order to properly address some of the things I was running into. So I backed up, sold the practice, and went back to medical school and residency for 7 years just so I could get back to this point and really do the management of stress properly.
So what were the stresses that you couldn't deal with as a chiropractor that you wanted to be able to deal with as an osteopathic physician?
Yeah, inflammation is the #1 driver of the chronic stress response after a patient's mental and emotional stress. And I could get somebody to change the diet, which would remove a major portion of inflammation, and we got good results. But we'd get hung up when I found a chronic pathogen in the gut, or if I had something going on in the nasal passages that was secreting biotoxins or mold. And so I needed prescribing rights to really do a good job with that.
So what do you think is the, like for practitioners who are watching this that maybe aren't going to go back to school, maybe they're a chiropractor, an acupuncturist, or a nutritionist, or a dietitian, a non-prescriber, what would you recommend for them just as far as structuring their practice?
Sure, yeah. It's entirely possible, and I don't think going back to school is for everybody. You would have to find somebody who's like-minded in your clinical paradigm and then partner with them. Show them the case you're working on, show them where you're getting tripped up. And there's been a number of professionals that I've worked with that couldn't help the patient but would if they understood what they could do to remove the roadblock. So it takes a bit more dialogue, but it was possible to do that.
So just, yeah, let's start at the basics. So how do you determine whether there's a chronic infection stress or an infection stress is playing a role in the case? And what's your strategy for like dealing with that? Bearing in mind, we'd like to start with the least costly, least invasive methods first before moving into drugs and surgery.
Sure. So the most powerful habit to create inflammation is the diet. And we spend a great deal of time both in our classes and my nutrition therapist to make sure that is not a continuing source of inflammation. But then you're going to have to spend a little money and you're going to have to get a really great stool test. And these days, there's a thing called PCR, polymerase chain reaction. It's DNA testing. So we find pathogens where traditional stool testing missed them. And so a simple stool test could cost a patient $300, and that investment can then show me C. diff, Clostridium difficile produces toxins, H. pylori produces lipopolysaccharides, parasites, yeast, and even mold.
Okay, and then so now you have that information. What's the, they have it or they don't. What do the next steps look like? Or is there an algorithm if you're thinking to what to do in what order?
Well, there is. And I've learned that if they don't adhere to a clean diet, then your eradication of these organisms isn't going to work because, at least in the gut, the foods can create hiding places. The inflammation then creates deeper pockets in the crypts and mucus plugging, and you can't get rid of the organisms even with a prescription. So you have to clean the diet. But then some targeted prescriptive protocols surrounded by nutritional supplements that would support gut function and healing, the probiotic protocols we use, they're all necessary. But it generally comes down to removing that one roadblock, that one source of chronic inflammation that's stimulating the stress response.
How do you effectively target one thing when a lot of the tools are like multi-systemic and are designed for killing as many things as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question because so many of my patients have a healthy fear of antibiotics, and I have to let them know that there's a big difference between throwing something at somebody's sinuses when you don't know what you're treating and then affecting their gut and everything else, versus, hey, I've got an infection called Helicobacter pylori, which has a tremendous potential to cause ulcers, stomach cancer, and is a major source of lipopolysaccharides all around the body. So is it doing more harm than my one antibiotic for 10 or 15 days? And rather than just say, well, here's your antibiotic, I'll see you later, we work with these patients to make sure that we're recovering healthy gut function and healthy microbiome status. We don't just leave them hanging.
And so are there cases where just the dietary shift allows the body to have enough capacity to deal with those infections without going towards using drugs?
So I may be in the minority. I know that everybody would not agree, but I'd say no. No, you're not going to get rid of certain chronic pathogens that have taken a foothold in the gut. If your secretory IgA is not capable of grabbing hold of these organisms and throwing them out of the body because your diet and your stress are too high, that's not going to work. But once you've removed these roadblocks, once you've actually removed these pathogens from the body, then there is an increase in the body's ability and its resistance and resilience to keep from getting them a second time.
And this is called stress in the brain. So that stress is typically not happening in the brain, might be happening in the gut. Yeah. How does it show up in terms of like symptoms that aren't related to gut health?
Yeah. So the inflammation that's created in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. It stimulates cytokines, immune chemicals, that then go throughout the entire body. So if it's in the joints, you're going to have a lot of joint pain in those patients. When it hits the brain, you're going to have attention deficit, poor concentration, depression, anxiety, insomnia. If it hits the skin, you're going to have skin rashes. So just about every part of the body is going to be affected by the inflammatory potential of the toxins created by these organisms.
And if we take a step back now to look at the 4 stressors, and you've been practicing through this model for quite a while, what have you learned about the ordering of those 4 stressors in patient care to get the maximum output with the minimum input?
Yeah, well, I continue to learn. Just in the last year, we've started to prioritize something called circadian rhythms. We have a group health class called the circadian shift, because everything I was doing to change the diet and get them sleeping was great, and removing these roadblocks of infections was very helpful. But the patients who are getting better faster are those where we teach them how to shrink their eating window and give their body more time to do the cleanup work. That actually reduces inflammation. If we teach them how to get daylight so that they fully enliven the brain and turn on the full capacity of the brain for energy, if we teach them how to block blue light so they can fully shut down and go to sleep, everything else we do is more effective. So that's the starting point.
So what have you learned about making it easy for people to go through this process from a patient point of view?
Yeah. Well, the biggest overarching thing I offer to patients on a daily basis is health is not a goal. Your goal is not to get healthy, it's to live healthy. And in order to do that, you need to take the time to upgrade your healthy habits, and over time, the trajectory of your health will move in the direction you want it to be. So we surround our patients with nutrition therapists, group health visits, because I can't transfer all of that information in a one-on-one appointment. And so we build a culture and a tribe. Our office is called Cornerstone Health Community, because that's really what it takes for people to start to live healthy rather than set a goal of being healthy.
Doc, thanks so much for sharing here today. I think you've really helped to flesh out all of this stuff. And for those practitioners at home, I hope this has been helpful in helping to think about a really holistic structure for dealing with the stresses that you're coming across in your practice. Lots of great tips. Let's check out the next segment.
Hi, my name is Monique Bowman. I'm a nurse practitioner in Houston, Texas. I work at Ron Medical Group. And my tip for today is to just remind patients that inflammation leads to disease. So the name of the game is to decrease inflammation, calm things down in the gut, calm things down in the brain. The gut-brain association is so huge. So deep breathing exercises, changing our mindset. Every cell in the body is like a mini brain. So practices of a gratitude journal and redirecting, reprogramming our thoughts. Deep breathing, because you're inflating your lungs with oxygen, which calms the nervous system. You're hyperperfusing the cells with oxygen, also can lead to calm and decreasing inflammation as a result. And then working on the gut, and just inflammation can wear down those tight junctions, and you can have a leaky gut, which can contribute to leaky brain. So again, the name of the game is to just calm that down, decrease inflammation through nutrition, meditation, even deep breathing and journaling, and having gratitude to help bring it all together. Thank you.
We are here with Dr. Allan Sosin making his debut on the Functional Forum, and we're going to be talking about blood sugar regulation, and particularly about blood sugar as a stressor. So Doc, just to flesh out your practice, tell us a little bit of how you practice and what your focus has been since beginning practice.
Yeah, well, I'm a conventionally trained doctor. I went to a medical school many years ago and did regular internal medicine for many years. I was actually a trained nephrologist, a kidney specialist. Oh, yeah. But about 30 years ago, I started getting into this other way of looking at things, handling illness and preventing illness with lifestyle changes. So the right nutrition, exercise, getting the right sleep, reducing stress, taking nutritional supplements, all of those things impact health. And those are what we work with primarily, although I also work with medications because I know medications, but our principle of the treatment is to help people avoid medications because of their side effects, and to get them off medications when they're willing, which they usually are, because that's why they come to see us.
So we live in America. There's a lot of things that could spike people's blood sugar. One of the things I wanted to just get into with you is just, you know, when people think of stress, they typically don't think of blood sugar regulation as a stress on the body. But can we just maybe start with how fluctuations in blood sugar affect the body from a stress perspective?
Well, blood sugar is a major toxin when it's high. I mean, you have to have sugar in your body in order to exist, so it's required. But something that's necessary can also be toxic, which blood sugar, glucose, is at high levels. And we know from the literature over years and years that people with pre-diabetes, who don't even have diabetes, are at much higher risk of cardiovascular complications, heart attacks and strokes and those kinds of things. And the death rate from a person with a hemoglobin A1C, which is an average blood sugar measurement of 5, going up to 6, which is still pre-diabetic, doubles the risk of cardiac events. So a blood sugar is just a little bit out of the way, can create problems over time. And you know, we don't eat right in this country, and we have a lot of foods out there that people are eating on a daily basis that tend to raise blood sugar and create diabetes, but they also create pre-diabetes. And we have in the United States 70 million pre-diabetics on top of the 40 or 50 million who already have diabetes. So this is a huge number of people who are at risk from those complications, which are mostly heart disease and stroke. But the other connections there are overweight and lack of exercise, both of which promote elevated blood sugars and create problems.
And what about on the other end? Are there problems when you have consistent low blood sugar?
There are problems. I mean, usually what happens is a person gets so busy or so stressed out that they forget to eat.
Yeah.
And blood sugar is altered pretty quickly by physical changes. So when the blood sugar goes below 50, a person's at risk of hypoglycemic events. And that can create dizziness, lightheadedness, palpitations, sometimes even passing out. Generally, in comparison to the high blood sugar problems, it's just a small part of that. Yeah. But it is pretty common because people don't oftentimes eat on a scheduled basis. And the other thing is, if you eat a lot of sugar-containing foods, which I include bread in that, what it's going to do is raise the blood sugar, and the body's going to put out insulin to lower the blood sugar. So you actually get a reactive hypoglycemia from eating sugary foods. So it goes up and it comes down, and if it goes too low, you have a problem. Alcohol does the same thing.
When you see people who are in that sort of pattern from taking the history, what's your typical sort of plan for helping them?
Well, we want to adjust the lifestyle, of course. So we want to change, what are you eating? You know, are you eating a lot of bread? Are you eating a lot of pasta? Those are the types of foods that raise blood sugar. They're actually almost in the body, have the effect of eating sugar itself. So we want to get them away from those foods and into eating foods that have less of an effect on blood sugar, which would include animal products, because dairy doesn't raise blood sugar and meat doesn't raise blood sugar. Chicken and fish don't raise blood sugar. But it's the refined carbohydrates and the sugars that have the greatest effect on blood sugar. So we move them away from those foods.
Okay, and in your practice, how do you facilitate that? Is that just you giving a recommendation, or do you have a team?
It's mostly me. We have another doctor there who does a lot of nutritional work.
Okay.
But I know the basic principles, and when you're working with someone, it's better to go with the basics than the complicated stuff. And you can give them lists of foods to have, lists of foods to stay away from, and just to work with them. And the important thing is to see them and review things with them, because they're going to run into problems if they're trying to change what they eat. Because we're all used to eating a certain thing or certain things all our lives, and then we're moving away from those. How do I get by? What do I do? What replacements can I use? What can I start eating that I didn't used to eat?
Yeah. Well, certainly, over the years in the forum, we've looked at so many different ways to do that through, technology and health coaches and groups and education. Just on a physiological, this series is called Stress in the Brain. Stresses that are happening in blood sugar, how do they affect the rest of the physiology of the body?
Well, it has a lot of effect on brain function. The brain is a very sensitive organ, so it really requires having stable environment. You want to have the right blood sugar for the brain, because if blood sugar goes, for instance, too low, which we do see in diabetics on insulin or even diabetics on oral medications, it can go low pretty easily. And people will get dizzy and they can pass out and have problems like that. Blood sugar being high doesn't tend to cause brain problems until it gets really high or high for a long time. And then you can run into serious and irreversible brain problems like strokes. Yeah. So it's really more important in the long run than in the short run.
Okay. And outside of just brain, are there other organs and systems that are affected by that continuous loop of blood sugar spiking and insulin?
I think the brain is the main one, because the other organs in the body can get by without glucose. They can create energy from fats and even from proteins, but the brain requires glucose to function. On rare instances or at really low levels, the brain can make energy out of fats. But that's not really very useful, not very functional. On a day-to-day basis, you need glucose for the brain to work. So that's probably the main organ that's affected. The heart and the arms and the legs, they can get by without glucose, or even with high glucose, they can do okay. But the brain's very sensitive.
What tools have you learned to use in your practice or concepts to be able to really separate what people tell you maybe that they're doing with their lifestyle versus what's actually happening? Because sometimes they may say they think they're eating fine, but that your idea fine and their idea might not be the same.
Yeah, well, you can look at them and kind of see what's going on. If they're overweight, which the majority of people these days are either obese or overweight, that's 2/3 of the population. That's 70% of the people in this country are going to be one or the other. You know right away something in the lifestyle is off, and most often it's the diet that's off. So just from looking at them, and if you can't tell from that, you can go by chemistries, which we almost always get. So you get the blood sugar, you get the hemoglobin A1C that measures average blood sugar, you look at the cholesterol, you look at the things that are affected by diet, and you can pretty much tell from looking at the patient and from looking at their numbers what's going on with them. And the people who have not the right lifestyle really don't look healthy. I mean, you can look at a person, you can look at their tongue and see if they're healthy or not.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious.
And so what are the sort of typical, are there sort of tips or strategies that you have in getting people, you know, now that you've identified that, you're dealing with the lifestyle, you know, sort of getting them off medication?
They need to spend more time and concentrate more on the right things. You know, in our busy, hectic schedules, you can walk into a fast food place and get lunch for $5 and eat it in 5 minutes and you're done with your meal. But that's also the way to get really sick over time. It's important to spend more time and concentrate on figuring out the right foods, how do I get the right foods, and actually giving yourself enough time to have them. You know, some people eat lunch standing up, they even eat breakfast and dinner standing up. They don't give themselves any time. And then you're not going to have the right meal if you do that. It's just not going to work out. And a person who can spend the time or has someone who can cook for them, which some of us are lucky to have that and some of us don't. We either need to learn how to cook ourselves, you know, or get an alliance with somebody who can help you out so that the meals you're getting are wholesome foods, they're whole foods, there are a lot of vegetables, there's fruits, there's things that are not fast foods, because those are the foods that are killers.
What do you do when you have patients where you realize that this is really like a social determinant of health issue, or that there's like a sort of like a family issue, or there's a lack of support that would stop them from being able to cook healthy foods? When you find patients that sort of may not be able to solve their own problems, where do you look?
Well, the parents have to be the leaders. You know, what the kids do is coming from the parents for the most part, and if the parents are arranging a situation where the kids are getting healthy foods, the kids are going to follow their rule. I mean, I know doctors who have new kids, they have babies, and they teach them from day one not to eat sugar, not to drink Coca-Cola, you know, not to have Snickers bars and those things. And the kids grow up without those foods and they don't even want them. If they had them, they probably wouldn't like them. But if they kept having them, they would start to like them. So you really have to keep that principle going. Yeah. And these parents have done really good jobs with their children, and their kids are thin and healthy looking, and so are the parents. But you know, what we see going on in this country, the United States and around the world, is that people are getting heavier. It's because they're eating wrong and they're eating less correctly as the time goes on instead of vice versa. And they're exercising less, and I think their stress levels are going up, largely because of the rush that's taken over in civilization. And we just don't spend the time and we don't focus on the things that we need to do to be healthy.
What are some other things that you recommend to facilitate that in people?
Well, sleep is a really big item.
Yep.
And in my practice, I see probably the biggest symptom I hear is I'm tired.
Yeah.
You know, and most of the people who are tired are not sleeping right. They don't get enough sleep, they wake up in the middle of the night, they can't get back to sleep. A lot of them are eating before they go to bed, which is the wrong thing. If you want to sleep well, don't eat anything within 2 or 3 hours of going to bed. And by all means, don't eat sugary foods and don't eat fatty foods and don't eat a lot of food. If you have a little snack, that's one thing, that's usually okay. But a lot of people...
meal.
That's right, fourth meal. Yeah, and some people wake up in the middle of the night and say, well, if I eat something, I can get back to sleep. Well, be careful what you choose, you know, at that point in time. I like to use calcium and magnesium and some other supplements like taurine and inositol. Those are good items that I take every night to go to sleep, and it works for me. And I don't wake up and eat something in the middle of the night.
So, Doc, tell me a little bit about some of the strategies that you now use to control blood sugar and some of the ways that you try and reduce stress on the body through blood sugar dysregulation.
Well, there's a number of nutritional supplements that are effective in making insulin work better. What's insulin resistance really relates to the inability of insulin to have its effect on the cells. So the cells are resistant. they're resistant to the action of insulin. It's not that the insulin is not there. It's there sometimes in large amounts, but it can't get into the cells. It can't work in the cells. So we use things like alpha-lipoic acid, which is one of my favorites, 400, 600 milligrams a day. I take it every day myself, largely for antioxidant effects. I think it's a good health-promoting item. Chromium is another one. A couple hundred micrograms a day is useful in supporting control of blood sugar. And these things actually can prevent diabetes. If you put everything together, I've seen diabetes go away many times. I've seen people get off medications they were on for diabetes. I've seen hemoglobin A1Cs go from 9 down to 8, down to 7, down to 6, with the person doing everything, which includes stress reduction and exercise and all the weight loss, but the supplements are a large part of that. They really help things go in the right direction.
That's great. How do you, what's been some of your plans to get patients, who have been very traditionally using medication and having them feel comfortable with using supplements or other tools that you might have in your toolbox now?
Well, it all depends on motivation. A person who's satisfied with taking 8 drugs every day because they have a doctor who's giving them that, they're not going to come to me and want to do stuff. They have to want to do it. And what's the motivation going to be? Well, something happened to them. They had a heart attack. They had a stroke. Obviously, what they've been doing has not been working. So what do I do to change this? And then we tell them, you're in a crisis situation, or you just were, and these are the ways to not have that happen again. But if the motivation's not going to be there, there's nothing I can say that's going to put it there. It has to come from inside, from them.
Yeah. Are there ways that you found to draw that out of them, like to find that motivation?
Yeah, what's happened to you. History is the main thing. Yeah. What are your stressors? What goes on in life that bothers you? And family history is a big deal. If a person's father died at the age of 62 from prostate cancer, or the mother died at the age of 67 from a heart attack, that has an impact on the patient. They think about themselves as maybe being, the next person who's going to get that problem, which is oftentimes the case. I mean, you see it, that things that affect the parents affect the children. And there is a tendency in families for high blood sugar. There is a tendency toward diabetes. There are chromosomal and genetic situations that lend a person to developing those diseases. You see people who are 122 pounds and they can eat anything they want and they never gain an ounce. That's a very small minority, and I'm sure that that's genetic in nature. But that's the way, that's the cards they were dealt with. But most of us were dealt the other cards, where if we eat wrong and we don't exercise, our weight's going to go up and we're going to run into problems from that. Obesity is now being considered the major cause of morbidity and mortality, more than anything else, more than cigarettes, because we don't have so many cigarettes anymore.
So Doc, thanks so much for being part of the Functional Forum. Dr. Allan Sosin, 30 years of functional medicine experience. Glad to have you here on the Functional Forum. Check out the next segment. Only a background of this much glitter would suit our next guest, Dr. Shilpa Saxena. Most of you know her from, she's been on the Functional Forum. She's also teaches for the A4M, George Washington University. She has not only built a successful practice and teaches clinically, but has also been on the forefront of the group visit revolution and is a hero in my book that comes out in January, which is called The Community Cure. So we caught up with Shilpa to talk about the 4th stressor, which is sleep and circadian rhythms. Super interesting conversation. Enjoy. All right, we are talking about the 4 key stressors on this show called Stress and the Brain. And one of the big things that we don't often talk about is sleep and circadian rhythms. And so we wanted to bring in one of our favorites here at the Functional Forum, Dr. Shilpa Saxena. Welcome, Doc. Thanks for being back on the forum.
Hello, James.
We haven't talked about sleep before, and I know that you're sort of like the super generalist, and so there's a lot of things that I know that this is a topic you're super interested in. So as far as like overall stress on the system and the brain, where does sleep rank for you in terms of if you were to order it?
Very high. I mean, I do think people put a lot of emphasis on nutrition. Everybody wants to get geeky, biohack nutrition or exercise, and then they seem to disregard sleep, which is what we do 1/3 of our life. Yeah. And so if you're not paying good attention to sleep, I think that so many of the other things that you're doing are not going to stick.
Yeah, so what is the basic sort of sleep hygiene 101 that you're doing for patients that may not have thought how much sleep is playing a role?
Yeah, number one, I've just got to make sure that people even understand if they're sleeping well or not, because some people think that if they're going to sleep at a certain time, waking up at a certain time, and they got their 7 or 8 hours, they're good. They don't ask the question, are they waking up restored? What kinds, are they waking up multiple times in the night to urinate because they're caffeinated or because they've got some mind-body ruminations going on? So quality and quantity, and then function is, do they wake up restored? If they don't have that, then we know we have to go deeper into sleep. So the biggest conversation I have is then looking at the things that are interrupters for good sleep, or do they need more promoters of good sleep? Usually it's a combination of both.
Let's go through those two categories just so, well, let's go, we're like promoters, what are we looking at?
So really important that we are naturally inclined to go to sleep. So what are the things that we should have had going on? Number one, we should have a bedtime ritual. We remember that from when we took care of our children, or maybe when we were children, you know, there was a bath, there was singing, there was a book, and then you got patted on your belly or your back, and then you go to sleep. There is like this hypnosis thing that goes on with a bedtime ritual. Now during that bedtime ritual, it would be really important not to do anything too stimulatory, just like you wouldn't do with your kid. So have a great bedtime ritual, and many times it should be something really comforting and soothing and feeling good to your psyche. It's not when you should be thinking about like the most stressful things that you have to do the next day. If that comes into your mind, I recommend getting a little book, writing down the things that need to be done the next day, and then closing it and ceremoniously saying, I got it. Let me put it over here. It'll be there tomorrow when I wake up. Yeah. Now, you might want to put in your bedtime ritual some chamomile tea or some lavender infused in the air or sprayed on the bed sheets, because those things could surely help the experience and help soothe the mind. But in addition to that, we want to make sure that we are screening people properly. It kind of really occurred to me that many people don't realize they're not having great sleep. So first we want to promote, but then the other thing that I think is the bigger issue is that many people have sleep interrupters.
Yeah. So what are some of those commonly in your patients or generally?
So many people will interrupt their sleep by having a lot of blue light or just digital, if you will, communication stimulation, whether it's the TV, the computer, the phone. How about you? Are you very addicted to your technology before bedtime?
You know, I'm glad you asked me actually, because I thought that I slept great, right? Because I went to sleep as soon as I wanted to, and I didn't wake up till the morning. And it wasn't until I actually put on an Aura Ring that I realized that my deep sleep percentage was super low. And I just sort of thought, well, I just must not be a kind of a guy that it's impacting to have my phone right there and look at before I went to bed. Turns out I was wrong. And so it was really good to have that feedback coming back to me, because my subjective interpretation of my sleep was that it was great.
It was all fine, right? But then people's most common presenting complaint is fatigue. Yeah. And so you got to think that if we're sleeping a third of our life, that might be where some of the answer is. So the other way that interruptions occur is with hydration. So first of all, it's the quantity. A lot of people like to chug-a-lug a bunch of liquid right before bedtime. And if your bladder does not match the size of the volume of the intake, then you're going to be waking up to use the restroom, and that's going to interfere, especially if you have difficulty falling asleep again. Yep. So limiting fluid intake, or making sure you have one really good void before going to bed. The other thing that people put in their drinks unknowingly that has a very long half-life is caffeine. So having caffeine even after noon, it's got a 12-hour half-life. And so if people are sensitive, they're like, oh, I can drink some espresso right before bed, but they may not realize that's really impacting their sleep.
What's the most efficient way that you found to be able to really get into this with patients in a short period of time, into their sleep?
I think it's really first important to get logical with them. Just like you described, you just had no idea that your sleep was not ideal. You thought, I go to bed on time-ish, I wake up on time-ish. And then until this technology has really come around, people are just now getting, queued up to realizing I may not be sleeping as well as I thought I was, because they just kind of take it off the list. So first we have to really level set people about what their sleep quality and quantity is. And then the way that I start approaching it is looking at the interrupters and the promoters, seeing which one fits for them, kind of like a good pair of jeans. What are they willing to do? Because as you know, if you're married or if you've ever been around anybody that you have to work with, when it's their idea, it's more likely to stick, right? So I could have 10 things that I think I want them to do, but if there's only 2 that they're gonna do, might as well start with those and get them a win. The other thing that I think is very important that's tied to sleep is circadian rhythms. What you think that might be of interest to our group?
100%.
Yeah, so circadian rhythms, chronobiology, in fact, in so many ancient cultures and ancient healing modalities like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, there is a logic for when you wake up and when you eat and when you move and when you poop and when you should start getting ready for sleep. So it's generally around, it's not really about the time as much as it is in relation to the sun. So if you look at sunrise, the best time to be able to do some of your most strategic work, your thinking, reflecting, would be 2 hours before sunrise and an hour after. That's kind of the zone. That's why you'll hear of things like miracle morning or meditation practices. This is the best time to do that. But then afterwards, when the sun is up, whether it's through the ancient understanding or just this is when cortisol starts to rev up, we really need to get into active mode, not thinking, reflective, peace-oriented, strategic planning, but action. And when you're in action, that's when you need your nutrition at the highest. This is where intermittent fasting really comes in. Like, you don't eat your huge meal in the morning because you're still in that peace contemplative time. But once the day gets going, you eat. Now, when the sun goes down, this is when the energy of rest should really start taking the driver's seat, right? And what many people do is, like, after sundown, that's when they start their second job, if you will. Like, this is when I'm going to take on everything else, and they're still in active mind, active body mode. But the body was meant to start winding down. And so what happens is that in the wind down function of the body, like in Ayurveda, you start actually becoming more attached to unhealthy, if you will, like heavy foods, like fatty foods, salty foods. Like, think about it. Do you really crave potato chips at 4 in the morning? No, it's not the right time for cravings. But if you do not start settling down after sunset, you'll see that those tendencies of gluttony, if you will, slothiness and gluttony, those are, if you put energy in that phase, you're going to promote more of those behaviors. But if you actually start, I need to start going to sleep, I need to start resting, reading a book, those kinds of things, you are setting yourself up for your bedtime ritual and falling asleep. Like, what time do you go to sleep?
10:30 when I'm in a good space,
And what time do you wake up?
About 6:30.
So you've got a good 8-hour sleep. And I would say that in general, if you could ooch that just an hour earlier, you'd be in alignment with circadian biology a bit tighter, if you will. Yeah.
Interesting. And so just, this episode's on stress in the brain. What is the impact on the brain of that lack of sleep?
The way that I describe it to my patients is that sleep is your control-alt-delete. So think about a computer getting worked all day. It's got a lot of inputs, and like, this, when you keep your computer on for too long and you don't actually shut it down, or if you don't shut your phone down. So what sleep is a control-alt-delete, where the computer is able to delete things that haven't really amounted to anything that needs to be held on. It integrates the things that needed to be held on, and that's really done in your deeper stages of sleep. And if you don't get to that, well, then you kind of have leftover junk the next day because you haven't actually cleaned out yesterday's information. So the better the sleep, the more integration occurs. And think about the immune system. It has to control-alt-delete as well too. It's like having a security guard that never gets a break. Their judgment the next day, not going to be as wise because they weren't able to delete the previous days, like memories, fears, all the stimuli. You've seen that with your child, probably, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm interested to think, when you identify that sleep is an issue with someone with chronic illness, and now you're trying to get them back into a habit of healthy behaviors, is there a certain time frame that you sort of challenge them to sleep well that would maybe give them a sort of an experience of what it means to sleep well consistently and what that does for their health?
Yeah, I think I try not to drastically shift anybody on their circadian rhythm. So instead, I probably work to do 15 to 30 minutes once every week or two, based on how quickly they're willing to shift. So let's say somebody stays up until 11:30, and the goal is to get them to 10 o'clock. So you've got an hour and a half to ooch, if you will. I might take a month and a half to get them to slowly acclimate to going to bed at 10 o'clock and waking up earlier. And then what we do is we try to make sure the activities leading up to the bedtime area are slowly allowing the brain to rest. And the more I feel like we match it up with this early morning rise, timing food, elimination, activity, and rest so that it's preparing for the proper bedtime, the better. But you can't just kind of, this is what you need, and turn on a switch as though it's going to happen like that.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yeah, no, I know it and I feel it. Well, look, I really appreciate all the tips there. Out in the sort of supplementation world, is that like a drastic last choice, or are there certain things that you rely on?
Yeah, no, I don't think supplementation is the last choice. In fact, some people need supplementation to actually get over the hump of their bad habits. And then when their brain is a bit more rested due to the supplementation, they can actually take on new behaviors. So L-theanine is one of my favorites because it's safe. You can use it for little kiddos. I use it all the time for little kids who have agitation, disruptive behavior at times. It really helps cool the brain down as an anti-inflammatory, and safe for all ages. You can use it day and night because you've got people, I'll say, who not only have a hot head at night, like they can't rest it and cool it down to go to sleep, but they have a hot head during the day. And sometimes that hot head during the day is what is the reason they can't get to bed at night. They just have built up, like a kid who gets overstimulated. Yeah. It's kind of like that. So L-theanine is one of my favorites. I love using magnesium because the standard American is quite deficient. So magnesium, and of course a form that crosses into the bloodstream like a magnesium glycinate or a chelate, anything that helps tone down kind of the excitement in the body. It's great for diabetes prevention, hypertension prevention. So you love those 2-for-1, 3-for-1 specials with magnesium. Last but certainly not least, I think it's so important. We've got a whole society of overthinkers. Like they can just fixate and analyze and ruminate. And I'll tell you, a lot of them end up in functional medicine offices. Yeah. So the people who tell me that they wake up with the what ifs, did I do this? What if they wake up like that, their mind-body axis is a bit too steeped in stimulation. So for those patients, giving them valerian root and lemon balm, it's, I always think of valerian root like Valium, if you will. Of course, it's nowhere as strong and it's not habit forming, but by asking a patient, are you an overthinker? Is that what wakes you up? It's your thoughts. I would lean towards valerian root lemon balm. So you can use a combination, and then as they get better with their lifestyle behaviors, you can wean them off the supplements.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most people don't want to be on a ton of supplements.
So a nice month protocol, do the healthy behaviors, get rid of the overstimulators, add the promoters, get some supplements going, have them have an experience of what it means to sleep well for a good period of time, and then it's just part of the plan from then on out.
Yeah, I don't know, it's like live like your great-grandmother.
Yeah.
I mean, think of how many things we've deviated from.
Totally. Well, I see the difference just living in California versus living in New York, and the timing and the sleep and what's happening at night versus what's happening in the day. Having kids, that's that changed too. So it's been an interesting journey for myself as well, and I think a lot of people will have got a lot of value from this segment. So we are going through all of the different 4 stressors, and thanks so much, Doc, for being on the Functional Forum again. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Functional Forum. Next month, we are going to be talking about biotransformation. And because it's December, we are going to be issuing you a challenge, which is to build a biotransformation or detox group in 2020 as a Kickstarter to making functional medicine group visits the new standard of care. If you're ready for the challenge, we'll see you in December. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.